Captain Stormfield's Visit to Heaven by Mark Twain. You see a mixture like that in the Grand Choir. The first day you land here, but you hardly ever see it again. There were billions of people when they were singing our Hosanna-ing. The noise was wonderful, and even when their tongues were still, the drumming of the wings was nearly enough to burst your head, for all the sky was as thick as if it was snowing angels. Although Adam was not there, it was a great time anyway, because we had 3 archangels on the grandstand. It is a seldom thing that even one comes out. What did they look like, Sandy? Well, they had shining faces and shining robes and wonderful rainbow wings, and they stood 18 feet high and wore swords and held their heads up in a noble way and looked like soldiers. Did they have halos? No. Anyway, not the hoop kind. The archangels and the upper-class patriarchs were a finer thing than that. It is a round, solid, splendid glory of gold that is blinding to look at. You have often seen a patriarch in a picture on Earth with that thing on. You remember it? He looks as if he had his head in a brass platter. They don't give you the right idea of it at all. It is much more shining and beautiful. Did you talk with those archangels and patriarchs, Sandy? Who, I? What can you be thinking about, Stormy? I ain't worthy to speak to such as they. Is Talmage? Of course not. You've got the same mixed-up idea about these things that everybody has down there. I had it once, but I got over it. Down there they talk of a heavenly king, and that is right, but then they go right on speaking as if this was a republic, and everybody was on a dead level with everybody else, and privileged to fling his arm around anybody he comes across, and be hail fellow well met with all the elect from the highest down. How tangled up and absurd that is. How are you going to have a republic under a king? How are you going to have a republic at all, where the head of the government is absolute, holds his place forever, and has no parliament, no council, to meddle or make in its affairs? Nobody voted for, nobody elected, nobody in the whole universe with a voice in the government, nobody acts to take a hand in its matters, and nobody allowed to do it. Fine republic, ain't it? Well, yes, it is a little different from the idea I had, but I thought I might go around and get acquainted with the grandees anyways. Not exactly splice the main brace with them, you know, but shake hands and pass the time of day. Could Tom, Dick, and Harry call on the cabinet of Russia and do that? On Prince Gorchkov, for instance? I reckon not, Sandy. Well, this is Russia, only more so. There's not the shadow of a republic about it anywhere. There are ranks here. There are viceroys, princes, governors, sub-governors, sub-sub-governors, and 100 orders of nobility, grading along down from Grand Ducal archangels, stage by stage, until the general level is struck, where there aren't any titles. Do you know what a prince of the blood is on Earth? No. Well, a prince of the blood don't belong to the royal family exactly, and he don't belong to the mere nobility of the kingdom. He is lower than the one and higher than the other. That's about the position of the patriarchs and prophets here. There's some mighty high nobility here, people that you and I ain't worthy to polish sandals for, and they ain't worthy to polish sandals for the patriarchs and prophets. That gives you a kind of an idea of the rank, don't it? You begin to see how high up they are, don't you? Just to get a 2-minute glimpse of one of them is a thing for a body to remember and tell about for 1,000 years. Why, Captain, just think of this. If Abraham was to set his foot down here by this door, there would be a railing set up around that foot track right away, and a shelter put over it, and people would flock here from all over heaven for hundreds and hundreds of years to look at it. Abraham is one of the parties that Mr. Talmage of Brooklyn is going to embrace and kiss and weep when he comes. He wants to lay in a good stock of tears, you know, are 5 to 1. He will go dry before he gets a chance to do it. Sandy, says I. I had an idea that I was going to be equal with everybody here too, but I will let that drop. It don't matter, and I'm plenty happy enough anyway. Captain, you are happier than you would be the other way. These old patriarchs and prophets have got ages the start of you. They know more in 2 minutes than you know in a year. Did you ever try to have a sociable, improving time discussing winds and currents and variations of compass with an undertaker? I get your idea, Sandy. He couldn't interest me. He would be an ignoramus in such things. He would bore me, and I would bore him. You have got it. You would bore the patriarchs when you talked. And when they talked, they would shoot over your head. By and by you would say, "Good morning, your eminence. I will call you again." But you wouldn't. Did you ever ask the slush boy to come up in the cabin and take dinner with you? Now, this is human limitations added onto something, right? But then again, they were, bouncing this off the sort of things that they heard in church. But when they're on Earth, the prophets, which we shouldn't make distinctions about, nor discriminations. We shouldn't invent ways that they're different, because they may not be different in those ways. Certain time and place, that's about all we can say. But they spoke to the people in a way that could reach the common person. It wasn't just, everything over the head. They had to reach just to what we didn't know by what we did know. I get your drift again, Sandy. I wouldn't be used to such grand people as the patriarchs and prophets, and I would be sheepish and tongue-tied in their company, and mighty glad to get out of it. Sandy, which is the highest rank, patriarch or prophet? Oh, the prophets hold over the patriarchs. The newest prophet even is a slightest more consequence than the oldest patriarch. Yes, sir, Adam himself has to walk behind Shakespeare. Now, yeah, in the Western world, instead of prophet even meaning spiritually gifted, it's just taken on a different meaning, like profound or something, like Jacques Cousteau's prophet. It's like, no. But the newest prophet, of course, is Muhammad ibn Abdullah. The one that people got to accept. Was Shakespeare a prophet? Of course he was. And so was Homer and heaps more. But Shakespeare and the rest have to walk behind a common tailor from Tennessee by the name of Billings, and behind a horse doctor named Saka from Afghanistan. Jeremiah and Billings and Buddha walk together side by side, right behind a crowd from planets not in our astronomy. Next come a dozen or two from Jupiter and other worlds. Next comes Daniel and Saka and Confucius, and a lot from systems outside of ours. Next comes Ezekiel and Muhammad, Zoroaster, and a knife grinder from ancient Egypt. And there is a long string, and after them, away down toward the bottom, comes Shakespeare and Homer, and a shoemaker named Marais from the back settlements of France. Have they really rung in Muhammad and all those other heathens? Yes. They all had their message, and they all get the reward. The man who don't get his reward on earth needn't bother, and he will get it here, sure. Now, of course, the word heathen refers to monotheists, pagan and heathen and Gentile, before 1967, these were all terms for somebody who believed in one God, really believed one God. Trinity, you're not really, you're not a monotheist. And if you are, then every other polytheistic religion is, almost all of them are, most of them are. monotheism if you're going to count Christianity. So, but the word heathen referred to material culture, not really spiritual differences among the Romans. And anyways, but why did they throw off on Shakespeare that way and put him away down there below those shoemakers and horse stalkers and knife grinders? A lot of people nobody ever heard of. That is the heavenly justice of it. They weren't rewarded according to their deserts on earth, but here they get their rightful task, their rightful rank. That Taylor Billings from Tennessee wrote poetry that Homer and Shakespeare couldn't begin to come up with, but nobody would print it. Nobody read it. But his neighbors, an ignorant lot, and they laughed at it. Whenever the village had a drunken frolic and a dance, they would drag him in and crown him with cabbage leaves and pretend to bow down to him. And one night, when he was sick and nearly starved to death, they had him out and crowned him, and then rode him on a rail about the village, and everybody followed along, beating tin pans and yelling. Well, he died before morning. He wasn't ever expecting to go to heaven, much less that there was going to be any fuss made over him. So I reckon he was a good deal surprised when the reception broke on him. Was you there, Sandy? Bless you, no. Why didn't you know it was going to come off? Well, I judge it did. It was the talk of these realms, not for a day, like this barkeeper business, but for 20 years before the man died. Why the mischief didn't you go, then? Now, how you talk. The likes of me go a-meddling around at the reception of a prophet. A mudsill like me trying to push in and help receiving an awful grandee like Edward J. Billings. Why, I should have been laughed at for 1 billion miles around. I shouldn't ever heard the last of it. Well, who did go then? Mighty few people that you and I will ever get the chance to see, Captain. Not a solitary commoner has ever had the luck to see a reception of a prophet. I can tell you, all the nobility and all the patriarchs and prophets, every last one of them, and all the archangels and all the princes and governors and viceroys were there, and no small fry, not a single one. And mind you, I'm not talking about only the grandees from our world, but the princes and patriarchs and so on from all the worlds that shine in our sky, and from billions more that belong in the systems upon systems outside of the one our sun is in. They were some prophets and patriarchs there that ours ain't a circumstance too, for rank and illustriousness and all that. Some were from Jupiter and other worlds in our own system, but the most celebrated were 3 poets, Sa, Bo, and Suf, from great planets in 3 different and very remote systems. These 3 names are common and familiar in every nook and corner of heaven, clear from one end of it to another, fully as well known as the 80 supreme architects, as the 80 supreme archangels. In fact, whereas our Moses and Adam and the rest have not been heard of outside of our world's little corner of heaven, except by a very few learned men scattered here and there, and they always spell their names wrong and get the performances of one mixed up with the doings of another. And they almost always locate them simply in our solar system and think that is enough without going into details such as naming the particular world they are from. And, well, the way we say these things in English, Zoroaster instead of Zarathustra, and, various things, sort of things that we do, putting things in one language to another, right? And it is the idea that, while Muhammad was the international prophet amongst the mixed, but as far as what we're listing here, they're mixing up prophets of God with other things, and But the idea that, the most recent prophet leading the other ones in the prayer of the time and that sort of stuff, it makes sense, don't it? It is like a learned Hindu showing off how much he knows by saying Longfellow lived in the United States as if he lived all over the United States, and as if the country was so small you couldn't throw a brick there without hitting him. Between you and me, it does gravel me. The cool way people from these monster worlds outside our system snub our little world, and even our system. Of course, we think a good deal of Jupiter because our world is only a potato to it for size. But then there are worlds and other systems that Jupiter isn't even a mushroom seed to, like the planet Gubra, for instance, which you couldn't squeeze inside the orbit of Halley's Comet without straining the rivulets. Tourists from Gubra, parties that lived on and died there, natives, come here now and then and inquire about our world. And when they find out, it is so little that a streak of lightning can flash clear around it in the 1/8 of a second. They have to lean up against something to laugh. Then they screw a glass into their eye and go examining us as if we were a curious kind of foreign bug or something of that sort. One of them asked me how long our day was, and when I told him it was 12 hours long, as a general thing, he asked me if people where I was from considered it worthwhile to get up and wash for such a day as that. That is the way with those Gubra people. They can't seem to let a chance go by to throw it in your face that their day is 322 of our years long. This young snob was just of age. He was 6,000 or 7,000 of his days old, say 2 million of our years, and he had all the puppy airs that belong to the time of life, that turning point when a person has got over being a boy and yet ain't quite a man exactly. If it had been anywhere else but in heaven, I would have given him a piece of my mind. Well, anyway, Billings had the grandest reception that has been seen in thousands of centuries, and I think it will have a good effect. His name will be carried pretty far, and it will make our system talked about, and maybe our world too, and raise us in the respect of the general public of heaven. Why, look here, Shakespeare walked backwards before that tailor from Tennessee, and scattered flowers for him to walk on, and Homer stood behind his chair and waited on him at the banquet. Of course that didn't go for much there, amongst all those big foreigners from other systems, as they hadn't heard of Shakespeare or Homer either, but it would amount to considerable down there on our little earth if they could know about it. I wish there was something in that miserable spiritualism, so we could send them word that Tennessee Village would set up a monument to Billings then, and his autograph would outsell Satan's. Well, they had grand times in that reception. A small fry noble from Hoboken told me all about it. Sir Richard Duffer, Baronet. What, Sandy, a nobleman from Hoboken? How is that? Easy enough. Duffer kept a sausage shop and never saved a cent in his life, because he used to give all his spare meat to the poor in a quiet way. Not tramps, no. The other sort. The sort that will starve before they will beg. The honest square people out of work. Dick used to watch hungry-looking men and women and children, and track them home, and find out all about them from the neighbors, and then feed them and find them work. As nobody ever saw him give anything to anybody, he had the reputation of being mean. He died with it, too, and everybody said it was a good riddance. But the minute he landed here, they made him a baronet, and the very first words Dick, the sausage maker of Hoboken, heard when he stepped upon the heavenly shore was, "Welcome, Sir Richard Duffer." It surprised him some, because he thought he had reasons to believe he was appointed for a warmer climate than this one. All of a sudden, the whole region fairly rocked under the crash of 1101 thunder blasts. All let off at once, and Sandy says, "There, that's for the barkeep." I jumped up and says, "Then let's be moving along, Sandy. We don't want to miss any of this thing, you know." "Keep your seat," he says. He is only just telegraphed, that is all. How? That blast only means that he has been slighted from the signal station. He is off Sandy Hook. The committees will go down and meet him now and escort him in. There will be ceremonies and delays. They won't be coming up the bay for a considerable time yet. It is several billion miles away. Anyway, I could have been a barkeeper and a hard lot just as well as not, says I, remembering the lonesome way I arrived, and how there wasn't any committee nor anything. I noticed some regret in your voice, says Sandy. And it is natural enough, but let bygones be bygones, and you went according to your lights, and it is too late now to mend the thing. No, let it slide, Sandy. I don't mind, but you've got a Sandy Hook here, too. Have you? Not the thing that Alex Jones made up stuff about, right? But we have got everything here, just as it is below. All the states and territories of the Union, and all the kingdoms of the earth and the islands of the sea are laid out here just as they are on the globe. All the same shape they are down there, and all graded to the relative size, only each state and Rome and island is a good many billion times bigger than it is below. There goes another blast. What is that one for? It is only another fort answering the first time. They each fire 1101 thunder blasts at a single dash. It is the usual salute for an 11th hour guest, 100 for each hour, and an extra one for the guest's sex. If it was a woman, we would know it by their leaving off the extra gun. How do we know there's 1101, Sandy, when they all go off at once? And yet we certainly do know. Our intellects are a good deal sharpened up here, in some ways, and that is one of them. Numbers and sizes and distances are so great here that we have to be made so we can feel them. Our old ways of counting and measuring and ciphering wouldn't ever give us the idea of them, but would only confuse us and oppress us and make our heads ache. After some more talk about this, I says, "Sandy, I notice that I hardly ever see a white angel where I run across one white angel. I strike as many as 100 million copper-colored ones, people that can't speak English. How is that? Well, you will find it in the same, in any state or territory of the American corner of heaven you choose to go to. I have shot along a whole week on a stretch and gone millions and millions of miles through perfect swarms of angels without ever seeing a single white one or hearing a word I could understand. You see, America was occupied 1 billion years and more by Indians, Aztecs, and that sort of folks before a white man ever set his foot in it. During the first 300 years after Columbus's discovery, there wasn't ever more than one good lecture audience of white people, all put together in America. I mean, the whole thing, British possessions and all. In the beginning of our century, there were only 6 million or 7 million, say 7, 12 million or 14 million in 1825, say 23 million in 1850, 40 million in 1875. Our death rate has always been 20 in 1,000 per annum. Well, 140,000 died the first year of the century. 280,000 in the 25th year. 500,000 in the 50th year. About 1 million in the 75th year. Now I'm going to be liberal about this thing and consider that 50 million whites have died in America from the beginning up to the day. Make it 60 if you want to. Make it 100 million. It is no difference about a few millions, one way or the other. Well, now you can see yourself that when you come to spread a little dab of people like that over these hundreds of billions of miles of American territory here in heaven, it is like scattering a 10-cent box of homeopathic pills over the Great Sahara and expecting to find them again. You can't expect us to amount to anything in heaven, and we don't, now that it is a simple fact, and we have got to do the best we can with it. The learned men from other planets and other systems come here and hang around a while they are touring around the kingdom, and they go back to their own section of heaven and write a book of travels. They give America about 5 lines in it, and they really make it sound like